Mr. Carter, a commissioned notary public who is also registered as an electronic notary in New York, is being audited by the Secretary of State for his notarial activities over the past year. Under Section 182.9 of the New York State Notary Public Law, which of the following actions is he required to have taken to comply with record-keeping requirements? 1. He must have maintained records documenting the date, approximate time, and type of notarial acts performed. 2. He must have kept the names and addresses of any individuals for whom he performed notarial acts. 3. He must have recorded the type of credential used to identify the principal, and if witnesses were used, their names and the type of credential they provided. 4. He must have retained these records for a minimum of 5 years. 5. He must be able to produce these records to the Secretary of State or others as necessary. Well, let's have a look at each of these statements one by one as compared to the relevant law to help us determine the solution. 1. He must have maintained records documenting the date, approximate time, and type of notarial acts performed. Well, if we have a look at Section 182.9 found in the Notary Public License Law booklet entitled Record Keeping and Reporting, if we jump to subsection A, subsection 1, I know it's a bit small, so I'll read it. It states that the records must include the date, approximate time, and type of notarial acts performed. So indeed, Statement 1 reflects an action that the notary must take to comply with record-keeping requirements, and we can put a check mark next to it. 2. He must have kept the names and addresses of any individuals for whom he performed notarial acts. If we look back again to 182.9, this time subsection A, subsection 2, it states that he must maintain records of the name and address of any individuals for whom a notarial act was performed. So therefore, Statement 2 also reflects a requirement for complying with record-keeping requirements, and we can put a check mark next to it as well. 3. He must have recorded the type of credential used to identify the principal, and if witnesses were used, their names and the type of credential they provided. Once again, looking back at 182.9, this time subsection A, subsection 4, it states the type of credential used to identify the principal, including for verification made in accordance with paragraphs 4 or 5 of subdivision B of subsection 182.5, the names of the witnesses, and if applicable, the type of credential used. So once again, Statement 3 reflects compliance requirements for record keeping, and therefore we can put a check mark next to 3 as well. 4. He must have retained these records for a minimum of 5 years. If we look at 182.9 subsection B, it states that any records maintained by Notary Public pursuant to this part must be retained by the Notary Public for at least 10 years. So Statement 4 is not correct because it states 5 years, therefore we can put an X next to 4. And finally, Statement 5, he must be able to produce these records to the Secretary of State or others as necessary. Back to 182.9, subsection C, it states any records retained by a Notary Public pursuant to this part must be capable of being produced to the Secretary of State and others as necessary in relation to the performance of the Notary Public's obligations pursuant to the executive law and this part. So Statement 5 also reflects compliance requirements with the record keeping, and therefore we can put a check mark next to it. So with all this in mind, let's have a look at the 4 choices to determine the solution. Choice A states 1, 2, 3, and 5 only. This is a correct solution based on what I've marked off as being necessary for compliance above and 4 being not necessary. But to be in the habit of looking at all 4 choices, let's have a look at choices B, C, and D. Choice B states 1, 2, 4, and 5 only. This is incorrect because 4 is actually not part of the compliance requirements, whereas 3 is, and therefore choice B is not our solution. Choice C states 2, 3, 4, and 5 only. This is incorrect because 1 actually is part of the compliance requirements, whereas 4 isn't, therefore choice C is not our solution. And finally, choice D states 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is incorrect because 4, as I've stated above, erroneously states 5 years instead of 10, is therefore not part of the compliance requirements, and therefore choice D is not our solution, which indeed leaves choice A, 1, 2, 3, and 5 only, as the correct solution.